Top 30 visits are ongoing here in Carolina, and looking at a few of the positions that they've been talking to a lot are the Panthers about to replace Taylor Moton, and his defensive tackle still in play during this year's draft. We'll talk about that right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show right here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, because on Friday, I'm back once again answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions as I do throughout the offseason. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council, or at me over on Blue Sky, also at Julian Council, to get your questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. 15 days. We are 15 days away from day one of the 2025 NFL Draft up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And until then, teams like the Carolina Panthers, your Carolina Panthers, will continue to visit with players and try to do some last-minute conversations and scouting ahead of that draft and deciding what the Panthers want to do at 8, at 57, at 74, and so on and so forth in this 2025 draft. So today, let's focus on some of the guys that they have been talking to during these top 30 visits, and also some of the local visits that they've had. Like on Tuesday was a local day for Carolina, which means that guys who either played college in the area, say at NC State, at Carolina, at South Carolina, Clemson, all of that, those guys would count as local visits. Or if they're like Jalen Walker and they're from Salisbury, they would also count as a local visit. Whereas everybody who's not from the region, the area, they would count as top 30 visits. So let's talk about guys who have taken top 30s and locals and kind of see if we can glean any information heading into this year's draft. Now, to be able to do that, we need to look back at last year when Dave Canales and Dan Morgan and Brent Tillis and this whole operation were here for year one, and see how many of the guys that they talked to as far as top 30s go ended up actually becoming Carolina Panthers. And when looking at last year's top 30 visit, they went over to CBSSports.com, as there's a lot of trackers right now for top 30 visits going on right now, and it's pretty hard to find what they were last year, as a lot of those sites just basically seem to be using the same URL. And then they update it so you don't get a clear picture of every single player Carolina talked to. I'll do a better job this year of writing them all down. So next year when we do this again, I'll know who they did talk to, who's a top 30, who's a local, and all of that. But looking at the top 30 visits last year that were at least confirmed by CBSSports.com, to talk to Brendan Rice, a wide receiver from USC, talk to Ben Sinnott from tight end from Kansas State, talk to a bunch of guys like Jonathan Brooks from Texas, who ended up being drafted here, like Jatavion Sanders, also from Texas, who ended up being drafted here in Carolina. Like, those were the only two of the top 30 visitors that they had last year that ended up being drafted, at least of the ones that are confirmed off of that list in front of me and on CBSSports.com from a year ago. So two of those individuals ended up being Panthers. Now, they did end up drafting a linebacker after they talked to Edgerrin Cooper from Texas A&M. They talked to Peyton Wilson for NC State. Now, Cooper was off the board, went in the second round to Green Bay, while Wilson was still on the board, eventually went, I believe, later on in the third round, maybe the fourth round, to Pittsburgh. But he was on the board, and Carolina decided that, no, we're going to take Trevin Wallace from Kentucky. And I do not believe that he took a top 30 visit for Carolina last year. Wide receiver, that clearly was a position of need last year. They had Brendan Rice come in. That's Jerry Rice's son. They had Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky come in. Xavier Worthy from Texas come in. Jalen McMillan from Washington. Devontae Walker from North Carolina. Those five guys all came in. Now, you would know they're at the pro day for Xavier Legette, and Legette had come out and said that the Panthers told him, if he was there, that they were going to take him. And, well, we know that turned out to be true. But clearly, based off of the top 30s from a year ago, they were interested in a wide receiver. And we already knew that was going to be the case after they had traded for Deontay Johnson. It was clear they needed to do more to help out Bryce Young. They did most of that work on the offensive line during free agency, and they did it also with Deontay Johnson being traded here, but they needed more long-term options and younger, cheaper options in the draft. And it was very clear based off of the visits they had last year that they were going to try and get him. And you kind of can go back and look to third round. They were sitting there at 65th overall. And instead of staying there, they traded with the Jets, who ended up taking Malachi Corley, while Carolina moved back to 73 and took Trevin Wallace. So a guy that they had talked to and visited with, they could have taken him, but instead they decided to move on. So going off of that, you could see that there was clearly a pattern where they wanted a wide receiver, that there was two guys off of those visits from a year ago that became Carolina Panthers, and that may end up being the case again this year with the same GM, with the same head coach, and the same cap and contract guy, EVP, with Brant Tillis being here in Carolina as well. So what can be taken away from this year's visits, looking at the top 30 tracker over on Panthers Wire? Thank you to the folks over there at Panthers Wire for keeping track of all of this. So far, they've talked to two running backs, Ollie Gordon, Jarquez Hunter. That's Gordon out of Oklahoma State, Hunter out of Auburn. Two wide receivers, Tedero McMillan from Arizona, Jalen Noel from Iowa State. They talked to one tight end, Carter Runyon from Towson. They've talked to five offensive linemen. More on that a little bit later. But the two position groups that they've spoken to and met with the most are defensive line and edge rusher. And you could say that's the same thing, but we're looking at interior guys and edge rushers. 11 interior defensive linemen and 12 edge rushers. Now, understand this. They went to the South Carolina Pro Day, just about an hour and a half south of Charlotte on I-77 to Columbia. So they saw TJ Sanders. They saw Tonka Hemingway. They saw DeAndre Jules. They saw Alex Huntley. They saw four guys from South Carolina, and that was an outstanding defensive line from a year ago. So that plays a big role into the amount of guys that they saw. But they also talked to Deion Walker here in Carolina from Kentucky. They also talked Cam Jackson from Florida here in Charlotte. Warren Brinson from Georgia came in. Kevin Pointer, who's a local guy from Wake Forest. They talked to him as well. Walter Nolan from Ole Miss. They brought him in. Tyrion Ingram Dawkins. They also talked to him as a local visit. So there's a couple of those guys that aren't just Gamecocks that they also were willing to bring in or met with locally. And that makes me wonder, is that still in play early on in this draft? Carolina has Derek Brown coming back. They have A'Shawn Robinson coming back. Shai Tuttle is going to be in a backup role. They signed Bobby Brown III. They also brought in Turk Wharton. You got LeBron Ray back. You would think that, at least on paper, and also based off of the experience a lot of those guys have, that the Panthers are probably good when it comes to defensive tackle. They have Jaden Crumedy, who they just took last year in the 6th round. It'll be interesting to see where he slots in this upcoming season as he tries to battle for some playing time on that second unit here on that interior defensive line. But I don't really feel like with the money they spent on Brown and on Wharton for those two guys be here the next 2 seasons at minimum, also with Derek Brown under contract, A'Shawn Robinson, I believe, is another year after this, last year for Tuttle, I don't really look at that as being a spot where they need to immediately address. But can you be upset if they ever decide, look at the defensive line, let's add to it and make sure that we're never at a point again where that is a weakness, which it was last year, primarily because of the injury to Derek Brown, but also they just did not have the requisite talent and depth that they needed. And if you draft someone maybe in day 2, that should fix that problem down the line and allow them behind Derek Brown, behind A'Shawn Robinson, behind Shai Tuttle, behind Bobby Brown III, to have the opportunity to not to play right away, to develop, understand this system, whether it's the same defensive scheme moving forward or not. And then they can be better prepared in year 2 or year 3 and still be a very talented player that you invested early on. And we did see a year ago, and I've mentioned this multiple times so far this offseason, we did not think that linebacker and running back were going to be early priorities for the Panthers. But yet, on day 2, what did they do? They took a running back in the 2nd round and a linebacker in the 3rd round. After they've already invested, we've seen, in defensive tackle, would it really be that surprising based off of how they approached it last year? Not to say that that's how it's going to happen again this year, but we've seen it happen in the past, and that's the only thing we can go off of as of this moment based off of 1 year sample size of Dave Canales, Dan Morgan, Brant Tillis being here in Carolina. Can we really be that surprised if, again, they decide taking a defensive tackle, a position that we on the outside and maybe even an inside don't believe is a top priority, that they still do that again? So looking at that, yes, 4 of them are from the same pro day. That's 11 guys. And that's a bunch of SEC, by the way, where all the beef is in college football. And man, would you really be that upset if J.J. Pegues became a Carolina Panther, if Tonka Hemingway was a Carolina Panther, if they were able to get any of those guys like Warren Brinson as well? I wouldn't be. Now, edge rusher, there's also 12, but we've already talked a lot about edge rusher. We know that that's clearly got to be a spot they're interested in, but maybe they're not as interested as they are in a defensive tackle. I don't believe that to be the case, but I don't think we can rule out defensive tackle at all early on in the draft just based off of the amount of top 30 and local visits Carolina has made with some of these guys out there across college football in this upcoming draft class. So that's one position to look at. Another one is on the offensive line, and not just the offensive line in total, but looking at right tackle and looking at Taylor Moton. The Panthers, they've talked to several tackles, and it's making me wonder, could they be preparing to replace Taylor Moton in this year's draft? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Taking a look at some of the Panthers' top 30 visits and whether we can glean any information on how they're going to approach the 2025 NFL Draft. Just talked about defensive tackle and whether that's an area that the Carolina Panthers may still address after going pretty heavy on it when looking at the free agency period. And we look at last year, running back, linebacker. I cannot put it past them to potentially go out there and to once again take advantage of a position that you don't think that they necessarily need to take care of in the draft. But we'll see whether that happens after they've met with 11 defensive linemen as of this moment. But what about offensive line? In particular, what about right tackle? Taylor Moton playing on a $31.3 million cap hit the final year of his contract. Carolina opting to not restructure, to not cut him, and to not, what I wanted to see, extend Taylor Moton for a couple of more seasons to lower that cap hit. They're going to let him play it out, and then they're going to decide either in the middle of the season or next offseason what they're going to do with Taylor Moton, who's going to be 31 coming up in August. And why I'm wondering about Moton's future is not just because the fact that he's going to be a free agent next offseason, but also because Carolina has been very interested in talking to some offensive tackles over the last month here leading up to the draft. Looking at some of the top 30 and pro day guys that they've talked to so far and local visits, Arianti Ursary from Minnesota. We talked about him the other day with Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins, Locked On NFL Scouting, also covers the NFL draft for the 33rd team. Ozzie Trapillo from Boston College went up to his pro day. Devontae Gordon from Wake Forest went up to his pro day down there in Winston. And then Arvin Hosseini from British Columbia, they went to his pro day as well up in Canada. So 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen they've spoken to. They've also talked to Drew Kindle, who's a center from Boston College. Those are 4 of the 5 are offensive tackles. So I got to wonder, does that mean that they're looking to replace Moton upcoming here in this draft? And they could do exactly what they did when they drafted Moton. Again, different regime, different coach, but that's what the Panthers did is they brought in Moton, second-round pick, had him sit behind some guys that really struggled that season. I believe that was Darrell Williams, who was playing right tackle coming off of that significant knee injury, and he really struggled. He played left as well, but Moton didn't get an opportunity. He played in every single one of those games, did not start. It wasn't until the following season where he became a full-time starter for Carolina, and he has played in 129 games as a Panther, making starts in 113 games over the past 7 seasons, only missing 3 games due to the elbow injury last year and 1 game missed because of a knee. He has been the beacon of consistency on that offensive line, an offensive line that has a ton of different players throughout his tenure here in Carolina, and a lot of guys that have not either lived up to the expectations, the contracts, whatever it may be. The one guy that has, even if he has not been a Pro Bowler or an All-Pro, it's been Taylor Moton. He's the one guy you can depend upon to do his job first and foremost and to be available. And that has been a massive issue, availability, and guys just simply doing their jobs and looking at the Panthers offensive line up until this past season where they got the guys who had the talent to do their jobs. They had the availability, and even when they missed some snaps in some games, there were guys behind who had the ability to step in there and had the experience as well to not let there be a drop-off like we saw in 2023. But still, Moton, that's a guy who I think has been awesome for Carolina, and I would love to see stick around. But there is some questions about his durability moving forward. I was reading Joe Person the other day. Joe Person, the Athletic, who covers Panthers, of course, and he was talking about maybe Carolina potentially getting Moton's replacement. And I'm pointing out to these top 30 visits and these pro days that they've had to maybe point to that actually being a legitimate thing for Carolina. And maybe they want to do that. But looking at it, the knee has been kind of a question mark over the last season. And they did a lot of maintenance of Taylor Moton's body this past season. Before recording the show, I went back and looked at it every single week of the injury report from a year ago. And it is nice over on Pro Football Reference. You can look and see when a guy was on the injury report, but they didn't show every single time a guy was up there as far as whether he played or not. You got to go back to Panthers.com and individually click on every single week, which I did. And looking at it, there were 3 weeks last season where Taylor Moton was not on the injury report, that he was a full participant at practice. Now, there's only a couple weeks where he just did not truly participate. That was week 6 and week 7 because of the elbow injury they suffered in that loss in Chicago. He was limited in week 8 with the elbow, but did come back and play in that game. He did not practice week 17 with a knee injury. He was limited week 18 with a knee, but was able to play in that finale down there in Atlanta. But there were 7 weeks last year. Week 3, week 4, week 5, week 9, week 12, 13, 14, and 16, where he had a rest day. He had a vet day on a Wednesday. Tuesday's is their off day, but Wednesday they're at practice. And on 7 Wednesdays last year, Taylor Moton was not injury-related / rest on the injury report. What are they resting? Well, clearly his body, but is there in particular a spot that there's or an ailment, whatever it is there's particular something that they want to keep under control? And based off of just Joe's reporting and how things kind of played out later on in the season with the knee, maybe it was that knee. Now, getting back to week 2, he was listed for a back / a knee issue. And after that, 3 straight weeks where he had a DNP on Wednesday for a vet rest day. And when you play as many snaps as he's played and you have the Ironman streak, it's smart that for a 30-year-old player, you're not having him out there every single day at practice, that you want to save him for Sunday. So I totally understand that. But it's not like he's 34 or 35, because there's plenty of those guys in the league that are still sticking around at those tackle spots at that age. He's still a younger guy. He's not the youngest, of course, and certainly after playing all those snaps, is not as young as he would be had he not had to play all those and maybe had missed a couple of games throughout the years, which thankfully he didn't, considering the disaster that would have been had Taylor Moton missed any time while everything else was going on with the offensive line. And as far as going wrong with the Panthers offensive line, I look at that and I just wonder, 3 times he's listed with the knee, 7 times just rest days, had the elbow that popped up as well in that Bears game. Are they looking at all the times they had to rest him and then deciding, okay, you know what? Let's let it play out here. That cap hit, it's a lot, but as Dan said and as Brant said, they had enough space to be able to go out there and do what they wanted to do. And they could always circle back if they wanted to and if they needed to. But right now, they're comfortable doing that. And he's going to be 31 in August. And depending upon how he plays, whether he's healthy again, plays well, has some issues, Carolina can decide after next season what to do. Or they can go ahead and decide now that with Icky at left tackle And in all likelihood, they're going to exercise that fifth-year option. He'll be here not just this season, but also next season. And there's still the possibility that they extend him and get a team-friendly deal instead of giving him whatever the fifth-year option would be. I believe at $18 million or so. They could decide to go ahead and extend him. He's going to be a part of the future. Dan Morgan's made that very clear. Taylor Moton, they have not made that clear that he's going to be here past this upcoming season. So why not look around and then decide if they get to 57 and say if they wanted a corner, the guy didn't want right there, say they wanted a tight end or receiver, the guys that they don't want, that they want's not there, and they look at their board and they look at best player available. If that best player available is an offensive tackle, I don't think it'd be crazy to see Carolina go out there and address a spot where they've decided that they're not willing to commit themselves to this player past this upcoming year, and that player is Taylor Moton. So watch out. We'll see. Are they preparing to draft Taylor Moton's replacement? Maybe. All right, take one more quick pause and come back and take a look at a couple other observations from some of the top 30 visits Carolina has had here over the last month, here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. You've probably heard of Chewy. They really do have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy, whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even pet health care. Chewy makes it fast, easy, and affordable. With over 100,000 products from all your favorite brands, Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food and treats to toys, beds, and grooming. And it's not just for dogs and cats. They've got supplies for birds, fish, reptiles, and small pets too. Chewy also makes it easy to manage your pet's health with prescriptions, telehealth vet visits, and even in-person vet clinics rolling out nationwide. Auto ship is a game changer. You can set up automatic deliveries for food, treats, or any essentials so you never run out. You can easily change or cancel at any time. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description. Save $20 on your first order with free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. The Panthers have met with a ton of defensive tackles, a ton of edge rushers, and even a handful of offensive tackles, making you wonder, is Taylor Moton going to be replaced in a couple of weeks here during the draft? Or at least are they preparing to have his replacement on the roster coming up here in 2025? May be a smart decision, may end up biting him in the ass if Taylor Moton plays well and he wants to resign in Carolina. But looking at some other observations from the top 30s that Carolina has had, safety. That has been a spot that Dan Morgan has said the Carolina Panthers are going to address this offseason heading in the draft, as they are still thin there. Nick Scott, he's on the roster. They brought in Trevon Moehrig. They have Devontae Richardson still. Sam Franklin Jr. saw this on Tuesdays. Now a Denver Bronco. So congrats, Sam, on his new opportunity. But that's one less guy here in Carolina at a position of clear need. And there are, again, only 3 guys currently on the roster. They brought in someone like Julian Blackmon and Marcus Williams to talk to, but nothing has happened as far as any momentum, it feels like, for those guys to end up being signed here in Carolina. So we'll see whether that ends up being the case or not. But right now, none of those guys have been signed, and there's still a lot of questions about what's going to happen at that spot. And I would have thought that the draft clearly would have been their plan. That maybe they bring in Blackmon or Williams, but primarily Blackmon, and then they draft somebody as well. They got 3 guys that I guess probably 4 guys, counting Richardson, I feel really good about. And there's another guy, Nick Scott, who primarily is a special teamer who, if you need to play, he at least has the experience. You know that he's probably not the most reliable player, but it's not like he's never played before, which would be the case for the rookie that you put in there if you do put a rookie into that safety room, especially as a starter or as a key contributor this upcoming season. So looking at it, though, right now, they've only talked to 2. They have talked to Jonas Sanker from Virginia, which I think is actually happening today on Wednesday, and then Nick Eamon-Wari from South Carolina. But again, that was part of the pro day. They talked to like 10 Gamecocks when he went down to Columbia. So I don't know if you can take too much away from whether they're that interested in a South Carolina person. But I'm sure you Clemson fans out there are going to be pointing out to me, well, they've never taken a Clemson Tiger. Why is that? I don't know why that's the case, but they just haven't done it. They have taken plenty of South Carolina guys recently. I mean, obviously J.C. Horn, they took in the draft. I mean, they signed Kleine, they've signed Woonham. There's a ton of Gamecocks on the roster right now, but right now they've only talked to Nick Eamon-Wari and then Jonas Sanker from UVA as their two safeties, or at least they're planning on talking to those guys. They've talked to even Worry. Sanker, I believe, is Wednesday. Today is when he's supposed to have his visit. So we'll see how that plays out. But that's only two. And even Worry's not going to be available for Carolina other than at 8. They're not taking him at 8, I don't think. That would be kind of crazy just based off of all the draft buzz and what the mocks have said. I don't see that happening. Now they do trade back, sure, but he ain't going to be there at 57. Sanker could be there at 57, could be there at 74, and he could be the answer. If they needed to bring in somebody by the time of the draft, if they don't make any other moves, like that would make some sense. A good player off of a Virginia team that has really struggled over the last couple of years, but has been a good leader and good player on the back end. So we'll see. And according to the tracker that is over there on Panthers Wire, they have done 18 of their top 30. So 12 more visits allowed just based on the ones that have been reported. So we'll see how many more safeties they bring in, but I would think that that's still a plan. And is it possible that what Carolina's doing is there's guys that they like, that they already spoke to, maybe at the Senior Bowl or at the Combine, and they're not taking the time now to speak to them because they don't want teams out there to know who they're interested in? That could be the case. Or maybe the plans have changed. I don't think the plans have changed. You only have 3, so they're going to take somebody. We'll just have to wait and see who that's going to be in a couple of weeks' time. Wide receiver, tight end. Spent a lot of time on the show over the last month and a half discussing wide receiver and whether Carolina could get a wide receiver 1. Dave Canales came out last week at the NFL owners meetings down in Palm Beach that he believes they already have that guy in Xavier Legette. Now, that is a surprise to me as far as that he's the guy. It's not a surprise to me that Dave Canales would believe that and would have that level of positivity, which is just who he is. And they did draft XL to be their number 1 guy last year. Like, they drafted in the first round. If you drafted somebody in the first round at the receiver spot, you're expecting that they're going to be your top dog down the road. And we'll see whether that turns out to be the case. But I have not seen enough at this point in time to believe that is going to be the case. But I also have not necessarily seen enough to say that it's absolutely not going to be the case. I feel like he's probably going to be a good number 2 for them. I just don't know if he's going to be a top tier receiver. And that was the question to Dave. Do you have that on the roster, or are you looking for that? And he believes that eventually they will have that in Xavier Legette, which is why they traded up a spot to 32 to take him and the 5th-year option, because they do believe he's going to be a top tier guy. And if that's going to be the case, well, it would be nice to be able to have that 5th-year option and be able to save a little bit of money before having to pay him maybe $30 million per year, whatever it may be, 35 by that point in time, 40. Who the hell knows? And that would be crazy. But we'll see. The cap keeps going up, so it would not be that crazy down the road. But they have only talked to 2 receivers. Taylor McMillan brought him in for a top 30. Jalen Noel from Iowa State brought him in for a top 30 as well. And Noel is somebody who, according to Bruce Feldman of The Athletic, who covers college football, he put out a mock draft about a week or so ago. He was on Ryan Russillo, and he was talking about a lot of people across the league really like Noel. He's a slot guy, good speed, and Carolina has a slot guy right now in Adam Thielen. Last year, don't necessarily need someone to come in and immediately fill that spot, much like Taylor Moton. Look ahead, like they did with Shaq last year, like they did at running back. If they weren't going to keep Chuba Hubbard, look ahead, take a guy right now who can add that speed and probably could play for you this upcoming season. Maybe he's taking David Moore snaps. We'll see. But Jalen Noel, someone apparently a lot of people in the league like a lot at that slot spot, and Carolina's going to need it. They have Xavier, who could be that X. They have Jalen Coker, who probably is better in the slot, but could be that Z for you. But then you add in Noel. That's something to monitor moving forward as far as a receiver that they would probably be taking around that 57, 74 mark there in the draft on night 2. And then tight end, that's another spot. They have Tommy Tremble. They have, I'm forgetting names right now. I'm going to look at the roster. They have Tommy Tremble, JT Sanders. So those are the top 2 guys. James Mitchell, which I think is an interesting one that they brought in, former Virginia Tech Hokie and Detroit Lion. You got Jordan Matthews still on the roster, Dominique Daphne. And then on Tuesday, it was announced that, or maybe on Monday earlier this week, whatever it was, that they have recently signed a former Coastal Carolina basketball player in Colin Granger, who apparently has been working out with, I believe, it's George Fant, who was a Seattle Seahawks. So you'd know a lot of these guys in the staff, and that would be the connection here to Carolina. A good article on Panthers.com about all of that. But he is a 6'9" player who's going to try and play tight end. He has not played football since he was in a freshman or an 8th grade, one of those two. in high school and in middle school. So it's been a long time since he's played football, and he played like 6 years of college basketball because everybody's playing 6 years of college basketball, which is crazy. And he's probably getting no NIL because he played at freaking Coastal Carolina and Ohio, but whatever. A conversation for another show and another day, but probably not on this show or any day on this show, but whatever. But they're going to try to do the whole, let's not use the name of the Hall of Famer. They're going to try to do like a Mo Alley Cox situation. Now, Mo Alley Cox is 6'5", a lot smaller than Granger as far as height, and George Fant played basketball at Western Kentucky, played football, a lot thicker of a guy, ended up being a tackle. Maybe it can be like a Rico Gathers who didn't really stick around, but Fant, Mo Alley Cox, those are recent success stories of guys that were basketball players that became tight ends in the NFL. So they're trying that out. I would think in what is considered a very good tight end class, you get a real tight end and someone who's played the position and not have another kind of project. It's like, that's like what Stephon Sullivan really was when he was here. And I know a lot of these guys weren't here when he was here, but they had him in Seattle. That's what Ian Thomas still kind of was when he came in. And we saw how that really played out. Get a real tight end. Granger, worth taking as a flyer and worth developing if you can keep him around. If he looks like he can do it, keep him on the practice squad, develop him. Like, that's a good thing to be able to do. But I don't think that should be like a plan. I don't necessarily believe it is a plan. The one other thing I'm looking at too is running back. I had multiple people say here that we've had on recently, would Carolina, and not even would, should Carolina, they've been suggesting the Panthers go out there and draft a running back. The two running backs they've talked to so far are Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State as a top 30 and Jarquez Hunter from Auburn as a top 30. And I mean, Hunter was really good last year for Auburn in his final year. Gordon was great a couple of years ago at Oklahoma State. Last year, I don't know what was going on in Stillwater. A lot of issues there for Mike Gundy's program. And Gordon, I think, was injured as well. But he was one of the top backs going the last year of college football. And I want to say that prior to that year in 2023, I want to say he won a Doak Walker for the most outstanding running back in college. Don't quote me on that. You can if you want, but I don't believe he was. I can't remember whether he was or not, but that was somebody that would be interesting to take. And with Rico Dowdle coming in, 1-year deal, Chuba Hubbard's still under contract for the next 4 seasons, including this one. And then Jonathan Brooks, who knows what's going to happen there. It's possible Carolina decides to address that position this year and look at Brooks and say, okay, you can come back, but you're going to have to fight for your job. We're going to get another young guy just in case that you're not ready to go. So we'll see if they'll be forward with thinking there at running back once again this upcoming season. So those are a couple other top 30 observations I have here as it pertains to the Panthers as we are 15 days away from the 2025 NFL draft. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, where I'm back on Friday answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. Either at me or DM me on Twitter, at me on Blue Sky to get those questions into me right now. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole as always, keep pounding, and I'll talk to y'all on Thursday.